Back with Dr. Ntsikelelo Breakfast and Mbali Ntuli of Groundwork Collective. So, Mbali, let's come back to you. I mean, I hear you saying that it is clear now that parties must know that not one idea will win. Right? There will be various ideas and they must learn to work together. But here's the challenge that we have. We have leaders of these parties who have what you would call a sense of entitlement, largely because most of them come from particular parties and they left those parties under all sorts of other debates and things that are going on. So they started these new formations purely because they want to advance their own ideas that were otherwise choked in the previous parties or broader parties where they come from. So what we have seen, experience tells us that it doesn't work that way.
Sure. So two things. The first is, well, it's a democracy. And, if someone can get up tomorrow and decide they want to run based on the color of their socks, and you would have to allow them if they were able to meet the criteria. So we have to also decide whether we want democracy or not. That's the first thing. But secondly, I think what most people don't also realize is how lucrative it is to have a political party that gets into parliament in this country. I mean, you get your salary as an official opposition leader. Even if you become one person that gets a seat, you get about 500,000 from the political funding, you get constituency allowances, and you get the other sort of benefits that MPs and MPLs sort of get. So I think many people who otherwise would probably not be able to get employment elsewhere realize that getting 45,000 seats or getting 45,000 votes to get a seat might be a better gamble for them to be able to hold on to some kind of power and influence. And so that is perhaps a flaw in the way that we have had our democracy working, but it is what we're dealing with now. And it's a paradox in politics because on the one hand, you don't want to discourage the opportunity to have many political parties that speak and represent many different people because we are a representative democracy. On the other hand, it can sometimes actually make people more distrustful of the system and make people more willing to actually stay away from engaging in politics. And then you, of course, have the apathy that can creep in, which only emboldens the few political parties that are there as well. So we have to have a situation in South Africa where we have enough citizens that are going to be going out to the polls, registering and keeping democracy accountable, as I say. Otherwise, we're going to be stuck with charlatans who take a chance sometime. And we're going to also have the detriment of not being able to have political parties that can organically come up and have enough people on that voters roll to vote for them. The reason we have so many political parties, but we only have 14 that are able to get into parliament and 3 of them have 89% of the vote is because quite simply there just aren't that many other people on the voters roll that haven't already been divided and scooped up by the top 3 dominant parties. And if you want to give any great party, even if you had someone with the best platform that came out tomorrow, they just simply wouldn't have enough people on that voters roll who are actively engaged in the democratic process to vote for them. So it's something that we owe ourselves as South Africans to also really introspect and decide between civil society, ordinary citizens and corporates what we're going to do to make sure that we can balance scales, because right now that's all we have to hold these parties accountable. Other than that, we don't have much of a stick because so many of us don't actually participate actively in holding parties accountable outside of elections.
Yeah. Dr. Breakfast, the inability or maybe limited ability by the leaders who form these parties to forge meaningful tactical alliances, where we see now and again they speak out of tone with each other or they criticize each other publicly, which tells you that these are leaders by and large who are interested, by the way, in serving their own ideas.
Of course, Thabo, the Constitution as it stands makes a provision for citizens to be involved in the political affairs of the country. So we cannot blame people for forming a plethora of political parties. But then the question maybe should be, is it strategic to have a plethora of these political parties? My answer is no, it is not strategic, because what that does is to divide votes, and that gives the ruling party an upper hand, despite the fact that it has fallen short of promoting development for the majority. The other issue, I just want to pick up on where Mbali left off, the issue of voter turnout. My view is that there's a symbiotic relationship between voter turnout, because of late we've seen that voter turnout tends to be very low. That is due to the slow pace of service delivery. If you have a slow pace of service delivery, because people don't vote just for fun. People vote because they want to see a change for the better, not a change for the worse. So if there is a slow pace of service delivery, then the electorate might stay away from the polls. So even though you might have these road shows, you might encourage people, you might do this and that, but if people are in power are not getting the job done, that is going to discourage the people from voting. In particular, the young people, because if you look at the majority of eligible voters at the moment, by and large, it's young people, and young people are the ones that are bearing the brunt. They are, the ones that are on the margins of the economy.
Yeah. So how then do those young people, as we were talking earlier on with Mbali, then make or tell a difference between, one, a small party that is joining a coalition in the interest of enforcing accountability, or, as we are seeing quite evidently in some of the coalitions, a party that is finding a loophole there to exploit horse trading for their own benefit?
First of all, Thabo, let me agree with you, because you made a very important point that these political parties, ideologically, they tend to be similar, the majority of them. Maybe with the exception of few like the PAC, AZAPO, the EFF, those ones, they've got unique political ideologies. But others are the same. I mean, if you take, for instance, you juxtapose it with Action and SA, to me, it's the same thing. The difference is that the other one is led by a white person, and then the other one is led by a black person. Also, if you take the RFP, it's similar with the DA. It might have a strong cultural element. So, from that point of view, they can join the forces if they want to dislodge the ruling party from the helm of power. Now, the challenge with voter apathy is that, even if you don't vote, the fact of the matter is you are going to get a government that is voted by other people. So you might as well vote. But also the problem with staying away from the polls is that voter apathy, it tends to enhance corruption, because elections are also a control measure of public participation, and public participation is one of the hallmarks of a democracy. So election, in my view, is the lifeblood of a democracy. But Thabo, I'm not arguing that. I'm not saying that democracy is only limited to an election. It's more than that.
Yeah. Mbali, the other issue, of course, is that barring, of course, parties like the EFF, which have been in existence now for 10 years, and people have had an opportunity to interrogate their internal structures and the organizational behavior, you have a formation of new parties that have only been in existence for a couple of months. And we have not really had the opportunity to assess their internal democracy, just in the party itself and organizational behavior, to convince us enough that, look, these are people that once they are in power, actually, internal party democracy is going to work and function.
I think we need to also be realistic. It's very difficult to have a political party that starts off and can also have a congress and a policy conference and run a campaign and register people. I mean, on average, it costs about 350 million rand just to run an election campaign. I'm not aware of any party that started off with structures in place and internal democracy having been 100%, able to be verified in every instance. And so whether it is the EFF or Action SA or Rise and Science or BOSA, which are probably the newer ones, I think it takes a few years to get them into the cycle of being able to have sorted out their own behaviors. And as voters, the best that we can do in that respect is to really interrogate them on what they say they're going to do in their manifestos, because we don't have anything else to interrogate them. They don't have, EFF does now and Action SA, but for new parties, they don't have structures that are so fundamentally cemented that you can do that. But I think we must also have some grace in that it takes a lot of courage to say that you want to try and lead in society. I'm not saying that people must just vote for them because of that, but to also understand that if you're unhappy with the status quo of the dominant parties, then you have to be able to be willing to give newer parties some space to be able to actually get themselves up and running and get there. Otherwise, we can't contain South Africans. We can't say we hate what we already have or don't want to vote for it, but then also have these really stringent criteria for new entrants into the market, because it's not possible that anyone's going to come up with a ready-made party. And as South Africans in particular, even if that was the entity, would be very distrustful of an entity that was like that in any case. So again, I would say that it comes down to us also doing due diligence as citizens. Obviously, political parties have a large role to play in making sure that they come out and make themselves as attractive to us as possible. But even in that instance, whether it's the more established parties, the new ones, what our democracy is going to fundamentally come down to is whether, as Prof says, we decide to be a society that says, we're so overwhelmed and politics is so much and there's corruption and scandals every day and we just don't want to be a part of it, or if we're going to knuckle down and decide that we actually think that this country is worth fighting for, and whatever political party is mushrooming up or whatever political party is governing, we're going to make sure that we are on their necks all the time and that they have no room to breathe because we are breathing down their necks. And that's one of the ways that we can actually make sure that we're doing this. And so also to the point that you said about young people and them being confused, I think it's also very hard to say to a young person, go out and register to vote, you're going to vote for a ward councillor, when you haven't done the work of actually explaining what a ward councillor is, what they're meant to do, how do you recall them, how does a young person sit on their ward committees, how does this entity, this democracy, which is theoretical for many of the young people, actually have a way that they can then take part and really participate by various different forms. And if we don't do that work, then we shouldn't be surprised when young people decide to be hands-off, because where do we expect them to have gotten that kind of information from? And it's not something that's common, because even when it's not young people, the average South Africa has such low civic education that the very people that are complaining about burst water pipes in Johannesburg don't know, for example, that they could have gone to their war committees and sat and decided on what the IDP would be used for right outside their own door. So it's not just the burden of young people, although of course young people right now, with the amounts of people that are eligible to vote, they could drastically change our electoral outcomes if all of them registered and then came out to vote. I think political parties would be terrified because they wouldn't know where those young people were going to go, because quite frankly, none of them are also doing the work to actually woo young people, and the youth vote is incredibly elusive in this country, and I hope that that's what we're going to see happening in the next elections.
So from what I'm seeing the next few months, we are probably going to have maybe three coalitions for that matter, because I'm sure the ANC at some point will also want to form a coalition to be able to govern somewhere. But we're going to have a moonshot pact that says no ANC, no EFF, and depending on what comes out of this deliberation between COPE and the other smaller parties, we'll have another coalition that is probably going to say yes, ANC, and according to Themba Khodi, no Freedom Front Plus. And you're going to have parties that are going to gather around the ANC, because the ANC would have promised them that, well, we'll give you that portfolio or that portfolio, so some kind of horse trading coalition. Is that going to work to hold each other accountable? Mbali?
Oh, sorry, I thought you were asking the professor. Sorry.
I'll go to the professor after this.
Oh, sure. So, I mean, again, people will make their coalitions on what they think is fit. I think it's going to be interesting. I think nationally, quite frankly, we're still going to have the governing party having a lot of its power. Where I think it gets interesting is in the provinces. And I think, again, with 3 provinces that seem like they're up for play, being the Western Cape, KZN, and GP, you could have a dramatic shift of power there that in the next time that we have elections, again, changes what the political landscape looks like. And I think, quite frankly, I would prefer that, because you want to eat this elephant a little bit at a time. And because there is this vacuum, and because there is this idea of not quite being sure what this looks like, and people not being sure what coalitions are going to do afterwards, perhaps, the governing party being below 50% is going to be a good thing, to also teach them how to play nice with other people on the sandpits. But I quite frankly am excited. I think whenever you have this kind of change that's possible in the country, you make people automatically want to sit up and actually understand that there's something that can still psychologically be done to make people change their minds about what a democracy is. So I'm less concerned about how the coalitions formations put themselves together. I'm more interested in what that does to the electorate, and what it does to citizens, in making them feel that there's still some hope, and that South Africa is still worth fighting for. Politicians are going to politic no matter what, we decide to do before the election. It's after the election, when citizens themselves have seen that there may be possibilities of change, that I think we'll see them decide to behave or not, and in which case by then we'll understand that we can punish them.
Yeah. Dr. Breakfast, are those the options that we have? Maybe there could be one more that others are saying is a possibility, but we're going to have a coalition that says no ANC, no EFF via back door, and the smaller parties who are obviously coming and exploiting this gap. So COPE, AIC, NFP, ICM, APC, and ARM saying, yeah, maybe we might actually speak to the EFF. We might even speak to the ANC, actually, quite honestly, if you look at COPE and their arrangement with the ANC in the city of Johannesburg. And then you would have the ANC. Others are saying within the ANC itself that there's a possibility of an ANC-DA partnership, or maybe an ANC with other smaller parties just to assist them to get the majority.
Well, Thabo, I think it's quite palpable that of late we have seen that these coalition arrangements are unstable, and also they are unworkable, because the political elites, in my view, have a tendency to rush into forming these coalition arrangements without developing a conflict management mechanism. But also the other challenge is that if you look at international best practices, you will realize that, like for instance, if you look at countries like Germany, France, Denmark, and so on, and Holland, because coalition formations, if you look at their intellectual history, they come from those countries. Normally, the process of negotiations takes a bit longer as opposed to our political setup. Because after elections in our country, political parties, they have a very short time to discuss about the future of coalition setups. So I think that needs to be changed, but also that should subsume an element of the views of the voters. But I think it's quite clear, in my opinion, that coalition formations are the future. My view is that there are two things that, in the main, give rise to coalition arrangements. The first one is a fragmented political environment. The second one is lack of a majoritarianism. So I think those are the things that have put us where we are at the moment.
Appreciate you both. Thank you very much for coming on. That is Groundwork Collective CEO Mbali Ntuli and political analyst Dr. Ntsikelelo. Breakfast.